We're super excited to be here with you at Abu Dhabi Finance Week. I am Paul Desmarais, the CEO of Cigar, and I have the pleasure of being joined by one of the greatest fintech entrepreneurs on earth, Yoni Assia. Yoni has built and is the CEO of eToro, the world's leading social investment network. It was founded in 2007. Today, it has 20 million users in 100 countries. And so it is my pleasure to spend a little bit of time with Yoni. Maybe, Yoni, we could start with you explaining to us, what is a social investment network?
So we started eToro in 2007 with the vision of opening the global markets for everyone to trade and invest in a simple and transparent way. And today we have over 34 million registered users who can trade stocks, cryptocurrencies, commodities, indices, ETFs, a variety of assets. And when they trade it on eToro, they automatically share their portfolio with everybody on the network. So our customers through the social network can actually access that information, see millions, hundreds of millions of trades of our users, their actual portfolio and track record, and collaborate with one another. And the unique part of eToro is we've created the concept of copy trading, which also enables our customers not only to follow and collaborate and communicate with our top investors from all over the world, but to actually automatically copy investors on the platform.
Wow. Is Warren Buffett a user? Because I'd love to copy him.
Well, not yet. We actually do have a product also that enables you to copy Warren Buffett through our smart portfolios, which enables you to invest in thematic portfolios, one of them being actually the 13F of Warren Buffett.
Wow, fantastic. And so one of the big things we've seen in the last few years is the growing importance of retail investors in markets. You have been one of the kind of facilitators of this, major shift. Like how are you seeing retail investing and investors impacting global markets?
So first of all, we've always been very big believers in the value of retail investors and the importance of the democratization of capital markets to enable those retail investors to increase their knowledge and wealth over time. I remember when I was a kid, I was already passionate about capital markets, and I thought one day maybe I'll work in a large bank and have to sort of learn from others, people experience in person and have that personal connection. I think today, through social networking, through the internet, people from all around the world have access to an amount of data that 10 years ago, 20 years ago was only available to the most sophisticated institutional investors. And as we progress over time, I think that access and those tools even become more important and easier, especially when we're thinking today of providing access to AI tools to our customers. Those tools potentially are not even yet available for institutional investors. And I think the markets in general have always been as efficient as the people participating in the markets. And suddenly the amount of people participating in the markets increased significantly. If you had only or mostly institutional investors in the capital markets taking a significant part and impact on capital markets, today you have the wisdom of the crowds and also people investing in what they believe in, right? So what we see in eToro, for example, is a lot of our investors are investing in basically companies that we're all familiar with, whether it's the Apple and the Google and Netflix and McDonald's and of the world, right? So a bias towards companies that retail investors are more familiar with. Or if we even think of new products like Bitcoin or crypto in general, then those are very retail-driven products because they actually started with retail investors coming to them first. So I think we're seeing more data in the market, more participation in the market, and therefore markets are becoming more efficient for everyone around the world.
That's fascinating. And ultimately, that adds liquidity to markets. And ultimately, it probably also adds sources of alpha, because in many ways, generating investment returns is about having access to the information, which we've agreed is more and more accessible, but it's also about interpreting the information in different ways, and more actors allow information to be interpreted in different ways, which ultimately, for those that choose wisely, that ends up being a source of alpha.
You're one of the largest fintech investors in the world, and you're an institutional investor yourself. How do you see that sort of impacting Sagard and your view of fintech? Suddenly, the access of millions or potentially hundreds of millions of investors into fintech, into investing.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because the way we're seeing, a lot of these trading apps is actually a really interesting way to bring users into the financial markets. I mean, if you look at, for example, in Canada, we've built a company, Wealthsimple, of our 2 million plus users, a majority of them had never invested in financial markets before. And so, as you said earlier, I view this as a major trend towards democratization. I viewed it as a major trend towards education. And ultimately, if you can get people around the world invested in financial markets earlier, the wonder of the world, which is compounding, ends up having a much better impact. And so in my view, that this democratization is in everybody's interest, because by giving people access earlier, allowing them to compound for longer, you ultimately will end up with people with bigger nest eggs, bigger financial security, which will then lead to better societies in my world. And so ultimately, I think this is a net benefit. And then for overall financial markets, it's all about liquidity and generating alpha. And I think by having more players, you end up facilitating both of those things. One of the trends that you mentioned earlier is the growth of crypto. You've spoken a lot about crypto. You've spoken a lot about blockchain. How do you kind of separate those two things? And how are you using them at eToro to drive your success?
So we've been very early on into crypto in eToro. And that's exactly because I was always passionate about financial technology. And as a fintech entrepreneur early on, I realized how archaic still a lot of the current infrastructure in finances. So when I discovered Bitcoin, I think this was late 2010, and did my first blockchain transactions or Bitcoin transactions, started mining Bitcoin, I saw basically the same aha moment I had when I discovered the internet about 20 years earlier or 15 years earlier. And that is, suddenly those systems can be connected, right? So blockchain is first and foremost, I think this revolution is a technological revolution, which creates a paradigm shift for 24/7 self-custody, and therefore enables, if we spoke about the democratization of capital markets toward investors, I think the technology of blockchain eventually enables the democratization of this industry to many more participants by creating global standards, by creating a 24/7 and therefore global ledgers that enable transfer of assets and many more participants that can access this industry. Which historically has been a very hyper-local industry with a small amount of participants in every sort of single market. I think crypto as an asset class, and I'd even say more than that, probably Bitcoin, represents something that as an asset class reminds me more of commodities, of gold, deflationary asset. I've always said that those assets, especially Bitcoin, because they're capped at 21 million, that led probably to the largest discussion in human history around inflation, around the printing of money, and what is money, and sort of the creation of money. So that entire discussion, especially when we think of our global world, where each of the countries where eToro operates, in some cases, have a different currency, different levels of inflation, I think suddenly having that universal internet money is a very interesting play that we'll see keeps on evolving. I'd say just one more thing other than Bitcoin is when we look at Ethereum is our excitement from smart contracts. So as a financial entrepreneur, we've always seen how hard it is to create multi-party agreements between different financial institutions. I think the opportunity of smart contracts to bring in new technology into this space is mind-blowing, but I think that will take some more time to embed also traditional finance into the blockchain and into smart contracts.
Yeah. It's fascinating because so many of the critics of Bitcoin criticize it for its volatility and for its uncertainty. But the reality is that if you look at the history of the world, most currencies that were ever invented have failed. And if you take a point of view from people in Argentina, Bitcoin's actually quite stable relative to their alternative. And so I find that a lot of the views on Bitcoin tend to be, very concentrated in the unique places in the world where there are stable currencies, but often miss the fact that a majority of the world doesn't actually benefit from that. In terms of the growth of eToro, you mentioned 100 countries. You are truly like a global platform. What made you decide to go global versus kind of local right from the beginning?
My view has always been that Gen Y investors, or now Gen Z as well investors, have the interest in investing globally. And I think that sort of started with when we're thinking of retail investors and investing in US capital markets, right? Because you have, even when I was a kid, I started trading NASDAQ listed stocks. But I think that aha moment was, it's the same product. And if the way people develop products today is very much based on a data-driven approach, right? Looking at consumers, how do they react to the product? And that's sort of the magic of a lot of consumer companies, is looking at the data of their customers. Our view was whether our customer is in Germany or France, Italy, Argentina, the UK, Australia, Singapore, or Abu Dhabi, that customers' interests eventually are very similar, and they're interested in, as you said, educating themselves about capital markets and finding various alpha opportunities that are suitable for them. So there has always been our view that the opportunities and the consumer experience are by definition global, because the customer is has a global mindset, and therefore that's what we're trying to develop for our customers.
Yeah. Another one of the big trends that's happening right now that everybody's talking about is the retailization of alternatives. You see platforms like iCapital. You see more and more of the advisors incorporating alts in our portfolios. We in Canada, in our wealth platform, Wealthsimple, have incorporated some alternatives in terms of the offer. What is eToro doing in that space?
Well, we'd love to take your alternatives from Canada and bringing them onto the eToro platform. I think from our point of view, we've seen the shift to, for example, interest rates. So definitely we've seen a shift into ETFs, into fixed income, which we haven't seen at all in sort of the environment of low interest rates. But we are very excited about the opportunity of the democratization of alternatives, and would love to get your view on those opportunities in the market. What type of alternatives are available for Canadians, and how do you think that becomes an international phenomena from an infrastructure point of view and a product point of view?
Yeah. Look, I mean, we're seeing very similar things to what you're saying. I mean, you really mentioned, the quest for yield. I'd say yield products are getting a lot of popularity globally. You see it in the recent flows at Blackstone and KKR, Ares. Retail is really having a search for yield. I'd say the hurdles to like mass retail adoption of alternatives are about education, where in many ways, the consumer and the advisors interacting with those consumers often have to be educated around alternatives. And then the products themselves, the traditional ways that institutional investors have invested in alternatives is not necessarily suited for retail. And so as a result, firms like ours and KKR and Blackstone all need to basically spend the time building the right product for consumers to be able to access, because ultimately, the needs for liquidity, the needs for immediate deployment are very different in consumer behaviors. And so we are very excited about this at Sagar, and ultimately building a lot of products to meet that demand.
Well, I would definitely say we'd be excited as we're launching now in the UAE and are hosted here by ADGM to say that sometimes it's also finding the right regulatory approach to launch alternatives to retail investors. And we'd love to find a way through eToro to offer Sagar products to our clients in the UAE and beyond.
I love it. Well, Yoni, you are an amazing visionary, an amazing builder. There are, you said 34 million people benefiting from your platform. You're growing so fast. The number I had was 20 million. And so unbelievable success. Extremely excited to have spent the time with you here. And we wish everybody an amazing Abu Dhabi Finance Week. With that, thank you all, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you very much, Paul.